Okay, so let's just, Michael, why don't you start just by giving me your name and the date? It's the 23rd, right, of November. And let's start from there, and then I'll ask you a few questions.
I'm Michael Brown. It's November 23rd, 2020.
Michael, it's been well recorded that you were the first journalist to become aware of problems in the Love Canal neighborhood. Can you bring us back to that moment? What your discovery, who contacted you? What was your discovery, and what were your first thoughts?
Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to make clear that a couple years before, two other reporters at the Gazette had written a story on the fact that there was a sump pump problem, and it had an odor, and there were some chemicals in there. They did testing. Then it was kind of, set aside. That was 1976. I came aboard in 1977, and there were two reasons I went after the story. It was not in the news, and it had been a couple articles more than a year before, and then it was questioned. It was very quiet, and I started to cover Chemtrol, a company that was dumping highly toxic chemicals in Lewiston, New York. And I really got onto the toxic waste issue in Niagara County. And when I did that at one meeting, it started up a lot of activism in the area. It started up controversy. The articles did. Toxic waste became an issue in Niagara County in a big way. I was writing about it every day. And at one of the meetings on Chemtrol, a public meeting in which people were complaining about the dump site there was a young girl who got up to speak, and she started weeping. She was crying that, this place, Love Canal in Niagara Falls, New York, this old dump was leaking all over the place and possibly harming her family and neighbors and so forth. And that certainly caught my attention.
Now, what was she crying about, Michael? Had she lost a child or birth defects or?
No, she was very young. She was 21 or younger, and she was just scared because of the odors, the odors that were coming off in the Love Canal. And, at this point, no one knew that it was a danger to human health whatsoever. I mean, there was concern about the environmental aspect from the sump pumps and so forth that I mentioned. And there were studies that the city had initiated an assessment of it. And I attended one of the meetings, and when I was coming down an elevator from the meeting, I spoke to an engineer. They were talking about the dump and covering it up with some clay. And I asked him, I said, is this really a serious situation? He said, if we don't do something about this, our children or our children's children are going to suffer. And that also got my attention. From that time on, that was in 77, I started to watch the situation very closely. I kept monitoring it. I kept calling the county health department. There was no news for the longest time. And one day in 19, I was trying to make it an item in the news. And I was the city hall reporter in Niagara Falls. I was in charge of the city. One day I was sitting at my desk at the Niagara Gazette, and something prompted me, I guess you'd call it intuition, to go out there and to, take a look around, ask neighbors how they were doing. When I did, I was shocked at what I found. The first person I visited was a family called the Schroeders, Timothy and Karen Schroeder. They had a young daughter who was suffering more than a dozen birth defects and some severe ones. And I started, there were all other illnesses in the family, including with Tim and another child. I began to canvass the neighborhood, and I went door to door up their street, 99th Street, what they later called the first ring of Love Canal, and in case after case, door after door, house after house, people were telling me a litany of different problems, whether it was miscarriages or cancers that they thought were peculiar. And so this became a journalistic obsession of mine. And I began to follow closely and write anything I could on it. I ended up writing, 100 news stories and news items about it. And possibly most importantly, other dumps in the area that could have posed even more of a threat. But when I called the state health department, and I remember it was a Friday, I mentioned that it seemed like there were illnesses out there. You could tell there was nearly an electrical reaction to that. And shortly after that, the state announced rather quickly that they were going to hold a health survey there and take blood samplings, and they found miscarriages and indications of liver abnormalities, and they took some that was from some blood tests, the liver abnormalities, and this ended up eventually leading to the declaration of an emergency on August 2nd, 1978.
Michael, what kind of resistance did you meet as you were covering this story? And let's start with that, but also, what was government's reaction and big business reaction when you first, when this issue surfaced at the Love Canal?
Well, you got to remember, and I'm sure you know, that the Hooker Chemical Company was the biggest employer in Niagara Falls. Thousands of people. It's also one of the larger chemical companies in the world, owned by Occidental Petroleum, a large entity based in Los Angeles. And so it was extremely important economically. The city government, the mayor, I knew the mayor very well. I used to talk to him every morning as City Hall reporter. That was Michael O'Loughlin. And the city manager, Don O'Hara. They were nice guys. We got along fine until this point, because they really did not want much publicity on this situation. And I was being assured that it was no big deal. They were going to just cover it with some clay and maybe drain the periphery, and that would be that. And this is before the declaration of an emergency. I also, because I was writing about it at any opportunity, I received a phone call from a state senator who told me, he asked me, he says, when are you going to go back to being a reporter instead of an activist? There's no issue here. He tried to basically tell me to stop writing about it. And
Can you name him, Michael?
It was Senator Lloyd Patterson. God bless him and God rest his soul. And also, there was a health commissioner in Niagara County. I really don't like to cast aspersions on people, especially ones who have passed on, as most of these have. But I'm just being a reporter here with the facts. I'm not necessarily blaming them for anything. There was also a health commissioner, county health commissioner, who became very angry at me for questioning whether or not this could be a health hazard. He was a medical doctor, and he said to me, are you a medical doctor? When are you going to be, when are you going to go back to being a reporter? And I was being a reporter. It's just that I wasn't taking answers at face value. I knew that there was a problem there. I knew that there were possible health ramifications big time. And in fact, when the state started to sample not just sump pumps, which they had done in a couple cases, but the air of the homes, the basements along 99th Street and South 97th Street, they found volatile organic chemicals in the air of those homes, including benzene. And this caused special alarm with me, because I happen to have read recently that benzene was the only totally proven human carcinogen from synthetic industrial chemicals back then. And as well, and there were a host of dozens of other chemicals volatilizing, evaporating into the atmosphere of their homes. So I knew that this was a big story. I told the councilmen, I said, this is going to end up being the biggest story in Niagara Falls history, and they simply didn't believe that. Later on, one of the councilmen told me, he said, I wish I'd listened. That was kind of a prophecy, if you will, and it wasn't a prophecy. It was just based on what you saw when you went out there.
When did you meet Lois Gibbs, and what was your first impression?
Well, again, I had been writing a lot about this and dealing with Karen Schroeder, who had organized the citizens. She was for a petition to try to get out of there. Don't forget, at this point, it was a problem only, they thought, for a few homes, and only at the southern end in what they called the first ring of homes, where Karen Schroeder lived, and her mother lived, and some other people. So she was organizing, Karen was, people to sign a petition about getting out of there. I think there were like 30 homes involved. And so I was writing about that, and I was out there a lot. And one day, and I don't know exactly what the date would have been, I got a phone call from a woman who didn't live as close as Karen. She lived a few blocks farther away, and her name was Lois Gibbs, and she asked if she could come and see me and talk about the Love Canal, and I said sure, and she came to the office, and I gave her a technical report from engineers who were going to try to remediate the southern end with some clay, and I think I gave her more news clips. She had been reading my stories, but I think I gave her more news clips, and I just talked to her about the circumstance there, and that was about the extent of it. I didn't see or hear from her again until August 2nd, the day it was declared an emergency by the state health commissioner. And
August 2nd of what year are we talking about?
1978.
So did you sense that this woman who described herself as a housewife and a mother and was trying to do the best for her family, did you have any idea that she would grow this movement into one of the most incredible grass movements this country has ever seen as far as the environment goes, leading to the Superfund?
Well, I knew that this circumstance at Love Canal was going to lead to that because it was huge news. I mean, it was massive news. It was on Walter Cronkite. It was all over the place. It was the front page of the New York Times. Just before August 2nd, a New York Times reporter named Donald McNeil came to Niagara Falls, and he called me, and he came to my house and had dinner at my house, and I told him about Love Canal, and he was a very young reporter, and so was I at the time. And I just gave him a box of the stuff I had accumulated, and I said, here, I didn't care about journalistic competition at this point. I wanted to see those people get out of there. And he took the material, and then on August 2nd, he followed up on the same day of the emergency with a front page article in the New York Times that created a firestorm across America, and it was a continual one, and along with the so that was the there was a lot of there was international publicity. There was a deluge. It was astonishing, and it continued up to there. Lois had a tremendous involvement in the second evacuation in 1980, 2 years later. But I know by this time I was in New York City. I had left Niagara Falls to write a book about Love Canal and other toxic dumps around America. And they had evacuated the first two rings at Love Canal but not Lois Gibbs area, which, like I said, was farther out and was not as contaminated. As a matter of fact, the state argued it wasn't contaminated at all. There was a lot of controversy over that. But anyway, she stoked up a lot of grassroots movement for that to be likewise evacuated. And in 1980, there was they found out that there was possibility of some genetic DNA abnormalities with people who did live a little farther away than that first ring and the second ring that were evacuated, and this led to that, along with their grassroots effort, keeping it in the news every day. Lois did with her group, Grace McCough and another woman, Marie Pozniak. They constantly kept it in the news, and especially in front of the Buffalo TV cameras. And so these forces worked to create that second evacuation, which also caused a national firestorm.
So how important was the visual element here? When you mentioned television, which is my medium and Tommy's medium, how important was television coverage in bringing this in an up-close and personal way to the eyes of the public?
Well, back then, it was important locally, especially. It was important nationally too. I mean, this was something that starting in August of '78 was, like I said, on network news. Back then, 3 major networks dominated. There was no cable news, and it was on all 3 of those major networks, as well as PBS, the public stations. So it was important. Back then, newspapers were far more important than they are today, and it was probably more of a newspaper story across the country than a TV story. And also the same was true of other circumstances. So it was certainly a big TV story, and it was important to have the television stations there for certain. Like I said, there was somewhat of a different environment as far as media back then, and of course, no internet.
And how important is it today to have this archive where we can actually see events unfold as they did in that era?
Well, I think it's important, especially if we apply it to what's going on today. I mean, after Love Canal, like I said, I wrote a book about it called Laying Waste the Poisoning of America. That generated a lot of attention around the country. I did hundreds of radio and TV shows about it, including the Today Show and Nightline and so forth. Traveled twice on national publicity tours, and I went on a college lecture circuit to speak about Love Canal at about 100 universities and colleges around America during the ensuing years. And the reason for that, the reason I'm saying all this, is because I thought Love Canal would spur this country, to take a look at the chemicals it was producing and using, and realize that you should not be allowed to use or manufacture a compound unless you can disassemble it in its natural components, not in toxic form. I thought that Love Canal would have a tremendous impact on the production of plastic, and we certainly know it hasn't. So, that was I think that was the real calling of Love Canal, and I'd love to see it materialize at some time in the future, because, look at the problem. We're creating more plastic than ever before, and toxic chemicals are very much with us.
You recall when dioxin surfaced and people actually said they had seen the military dumping that I guess that's probably the most toxic, isn't it, Michael, the most toxic substance created by humans?
It was the finding of dioxin in the confirmation of it in December of 1978 that probably caused the biggest single reaction of any single day with Love Canal. I remember it very distinctly. The health commissioner quietly, he called me up and he said, "I'm going to have some big news for you." He was going to, and and then he actually, at the time, he was laboratory director. He later on became health commissioner. David Axelrod, an excellent human being, an unsung hero of Love Canal behind the scenes in Albany. And he tipped me off to the dioxin, and I confirmed that there was something called trichlorophenol in the canal, which always carries dioxin as an unwanted byproduct. And at the time, it may still hold true today, I don't know. Dioxin, or what they call TCDD, was the most toxic synthetic compound ever tested by humans. So this, like I said, this created a fantastic uproar and a lot more national publicity.
In human terms, did you see the children who had birth defects? Did you see the results, the human misery that these chemicals created in Love Canal? And what was your reaction as a fellow human being when you actually saw the results of this?
Well, you take Karen Schroeder's daughter, Sherry. I just wanted them out of there. And I didn't care if I did become an activist. I wanted these people out of there. And I was a journalist through it, but yes, the motive was to get these people out, because I did see these results. I did see the suffering. I did see the pools of chemicals in the backyards, the chemicals that would come and push a pool out of the ground. There was a case across the canal at 97th Street in the Janice family was the name, and you had black sludge that came up through the drain in their in-ground swimming pool. And I remember Mrs. Janice telling me that she didn't know what it was. She went down and cleaned up this black gunk, this slurry or sludge, and then afterwards became very sick. First of all, with a tremendous skin rash, and then a litany, a panoply of other ailments. Well, her ailments, you can never prove these things, her ailments perfectly matched those that are caused by contact with dioxin. And I even called up her doctor, her dermatologist, because he had diagnosed her as having lupus, and I said, doctor, and I explained that she was probably in contact with dioxin, and again I heard from him, what are you, a doctor? Why don't you just be a reporter? And I was very concerned for her health. She ended up dying at a young age. Can't prove it was from chemicals. You never can, but it certainly was suspect. So I saw that suffering, and I saw certainly other cases up and down 99th, 97th Street. And soon I found out that the Love Canal was 3 times the size that the government thought it was. And then I was doing some testing of sump pumps with a chemical laboratory, and found that the spread of chemicals was farther than the government thought, including into neighborhoods that were approaching, for instance, Lois Gibbs neighborhood and others in that area. And again, these type of findings did not offer comfort to the people there, and certainly energized the circumstance. And Lois Gibbs and Grace and Marie, they really kept at it to try to get those other people out of there, and they eventually succeeded.
Michael, were you ever threatened by any special interest groups that stood to lose a lot of money? And were you ever actually threatened?
When I was writing Laying Waste, and I would return to Niagara Falls, I'd be tailed. There were and I'm not blaming anyone in particular, any company in particular, but when a paperback version of my book, Laying Waste, came out, the publisher, which was Pocket Books, was concerned because somehow my schedule had gotten out. I would go to a city, let's say Chicago, and I'd be doing the big morning show there TV show, and there would be a representative of a chemical company in the lobby demanding loudly that he or they be allowed in, and then just basically disrupting things. Well, they couldn't figure out how the industry had gotten my schedule, my precise schedule, and I remember even going down to the basement of the apartment buildings I lived on in East 76th Street in Manhattan, and checking to see if there were any devices on the phone panel down in the basement, for the apartments in that building. Never proved that was the case. Legal threats. Louis Nizer, who at the time was the most famous, the most prominent litigant as far as suing newspapers for whatever, slander and so forth, threatened the publisher of the hardcover Lang Waste, which was Pantheon, they're owned by Random House, threatened to sue them basically out of existence if they published my book. So there was a legal threat, and during this time, I don't know. I'm not imputing a particular company or politician or whomever, but there was a rather suspect circumstance in which I returned to Niagara Falls to attend a wedding and was briefly arrested. And then all charges dropped just so that they could get a little bit of a headline. And a lawyer that came, that was outraged by what they did to me, came and made them not just drop charges, but to destroy the fact that the arrest even ever occurred. So
what were the charges on that?
They were trying to claim I assaulted two police officers who I had been coming out of a place in Niagara Falls, and they grabbed me and holding me off for no reason, and then claiming that I was resisting them, assaulting them, and so forth. One of them, I don't like to be too specific because I can't prove anything, but one of them was a close relative of a politician who was very disturbed at my reporting on Love Canal, and in fact, when one of the councilmen proposed having a Michael Brown Day for Love Canal, his response publicly was over my dead body. So I don't know why that happened. It didn't deter me, but it made you think. I remember doing a radio show with a guy named John Otto. I think you remember him, Rich.
Sure. John Otto, of course.
And during our show, the phones went blank. And when he called me back after it came on, he said to me off the air, he said, Michael, are you okay? Are you safe? And I said, why? And he said, I've never heard a phone act like that before. I've never had that happen before. Be careful. He was concerned. But other than that, no, I can't say somebody called me up and said, we're going to kill you. I got threats elsewhere in other situations for toxic waste, including kind of a mob associate in New Jersey, but that was not Hooker Chemical, that was not Love Canal, it had nothing to do with Niagara Falls or any companies there.
All right, we got to wrap up pretty soon. Let me ask you this. What would you like your legacy to be, number one? Number two, what as a society have we learned as a result of your work and the work of those who covered that nightmare?
Again, I'm disappointed with the results so far. I mean, after Love Canal, there was a Superfund, which I'm sure you're familiar with, that caused a lot of the most acute circumstances with these dumps to be remediated, as far as putting clay covers on them and draining them, draining the leachate. But we're still dumping this stuff or incinerating it in a way that could be hazardous to people. We still have a lot of chemical companies belching stuff out in poor neighborhoods, very possibly causing the same type of things that happen at Love Canal. I don't think Love Canal was the most dangerous situation I saw in America. It was just the one that was the first one and got a lot of publicity, thanks to being the first one, thanks to the activism of people there and so forth. At least dozens of dumps around America were stopped from major leakage of seepage, I should say, and it made the industry look at better means of disposal, no question about that. But matters have been reversed in recent years. The EPA has been gutted, really, and toxicants are now once more being allowed into the air and water in a way that is of major concern. So there's a lot of work to be done and lessons still to be learned from Love Canal and the many other dumps around America.
How about your own legacy, Michael? You've become a very spiritual human. You have a website, a Catholic website. Did Love Canal change you in any way? You talked about borderline activism as a reporter. What was the impact of that? That was probably your first really, really, really big story. Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, I was 25 years old, so I was just 20. Well, in 1978, I would have been 26 years old. So, yeah, it was, I'd only been on a newspaper a year to year and a half when it really blew open. But so sure, it was, it wasn't the first toxic waste story I wrote, because I wrote a lot of big local stories on chemtrail and so forth. But yes, and there were other dumps after Love Canal that I think were tremendously concerning and might still be in Niagara Falls, that were bigger than Love Canal and have the exact same chemicals in them. One of them I found back in 1978 was leaking into the water supply for the entire city. They had to relocate the water plant there.
Was that the S dump, or was that the S dump?
That's right. And also then I located one, actually before that, became known as Bloody Run, or the Hyde Park landfill, and Myrex and dioxin were seeping out of there, and they determined it was the source of Myrex that had caused the closure of fishing across Lake Ontario. And this is upstream. This was leaking into the Niagara Gorge, upstream from the city of Toronto. Al Gore flew into town. It was in the Gazette, the newspaper I was writing for, and then Donald McNeil came in. He would call me periodically, any big stories going on, and I told him about Bloody Run, and he came up. He wrote a story about Bloody Run, and Al Gore flew into town when he was a congressman, and went down the gorge himself to take a look at what was going on. So as far as legacy, I was not a churchgoer back in Love Canal days. After Love Canal, I wrote a book on the mafia in New Jersey, and it was during that book that I had a metanoia, if you want, and became spiritual gradually, and perhaps at times all of a sudden. But as far as a legacy, I'm not sure that I'm concerned about a legacy. The people got out of there, and that's what I wanted to see, and that was the goal all along, and also to try to expose some equally acute situations around America, which we were able to do with the book. And I wrote articles for the New York Times Magazine, for the Atlantic Monthly, Reader's Digest, New York Magazine, a lot of different publications, Audubon Magazine, on this problem. And I feel satisfied that between that and the appearances publicizing Laying Waste the Book, as well as the college lectures, there'd be local media coverage, that word really got out there about toxic waste back in the 80s.
A final question. Are you optimistic about the future of the free press? And are you optimistic about the future of based on lessons learned from your work?
Well, I'm optimistic that the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States is going to be rebuilt in the next few years. I'm optimistic that the environment will come back into being as an important issue. We're not talking about tree hugging. We're talking about people like Sherry Schroeder with more than a dozen birth defects. Um, I'm optimistic in that sense. As far as the media, hard to get your arms around what the media is right now because it's so huge, ginormous, I guess you would say. It's just beyond anything we ever conceive with the internet and all these blog sites. And unfortunately, you have it. At many points, you have what seems like two different realities going on. A large segment of the population believes one thing, another thing, and a lot of people have been uh, conditioned or even brainwashed into thinking that the environment is a joke. It's nothing to be concerned about. We have to be concerned only about the economy. So I do think that that's going to diminish in the environment because of the young people in this country. The young people are concerned about the environment. They're inheriting all this. I think because of these young people, there's a lot of hope, and I hope they go forward and pick up the ball that has been dropped in the last decade or so.
On that note of hope, I want to thank you for taking your time with me and with Tom Vetter, and hope that the lessons that you hoped would get out there will sink in deeply as we have a change of administration, maybe a change of thinking in this country. Thank you so much, Michael Brown. Appreciate it very much.
Well, thanks for having me.